racism. Why? Because letting labels define who you are on an individual level breeds polarization, and we know what that does to your perception, from episode 39. Now join me in this edition of Spirit Seekers to explore this and other provocative statements that truly live up to the show's name in episode 43 of I'm Just Gonna Say It, The Great Transformation, the end of identifying with our demographics. Oh, and sorry for my unannounced 2-week absence. This episode kept morphing due to all of the current events, aside from some priorities in my personal life which had to take first place. But I always come back. So, episode 43, here we go. Now before I continue, I want to make a few things clear, knowing how some of the statements I'm about to make are going to be interpreted by some. While I do not support most of the anti-racism movement that is currently sweeping the West, I am not racist, nor have I ever been. I firmly adhere to the basic value of every human life, and non-human for that matter. Equality from a spiritual perspective, and the belief we all deserve equal abundance. Because all are born guilt-free. That is, in my opinion, the only just point from where to start forming a definition of racism. A lot of dictionaries, however, say something akin to the belief that different races possess distinct characteristics, abilities, or qualities, especially so as to distinguish them as inferior or superior to one another. If we remove this last sentence about superiority, we arrive at a perfectly correct statement, when talking about averages, of course. And it's no belief, it's based on empiric science, backed up by numbers 1,000,000 times over. The belief that these differences do not exist and that the only differences between races, on average, is the color of our skin, is madness and totally denies how evolution and genealogy have been proven to function. I mean, why do we have so many issues with stating these differences? We have zero problems with stating that one dog breed is better at hunting or has more spatial awareness than another breed. This is in actuality one of the main causes of actual, let's call it nefarious racism. Now, great transformation is ahead of us. No, actually, we are in the middle of it. I think nobody can deny that they feel it and have felt it for a while. We are on the verge of a great leap in evolution. The current crisis has, besides dealing us with an enormous economic blow, provided us with a predisposing event, so to speak. It is proving to be the catalyst of a transformation that has been lying dormant for ages, longing to be released ever more as that time went on. The cracks were already starting to show the last decade, but have recently developed into huge chasms, bursting with transformational light. The crisis itself and the obvious demonstrations and skirmishes that we are seeing at this very moment all around the world, and especially in the United States, are but symptoms of a much larger phenomenon. Humanity is starting to return to its natural state of unification, standing united. This tendency has always existed in us, but was suppressed for millennia by those in power. Whether that was a conscious effort or not on their side is not even important. Their days are numbered anyhow. Now this all sounds wonderful, but at the moment this transformational energy is being directed in all the wrong ways. All over the world we see protest and racism, all fired up by one person committing one horrible act, followed by a group of people doing whatever they could do to throw gas on the proverbial fire, all under the flag of righteousness and morality, supposedly. Now, in all likelihood, the person who killed George Floyd was instructed to do so. But that is beside the point and not something I want to discuss in this episode. However, do you really think that George Floyd is happy with what he is seeing from the heavens above? With what people are doing in his name? I'm pretty sure he's horrified to be at the base of something that is only increasing the divide between races. I mean, taking down a Lincoln Memorial? Are these people serious? An event like this, i.e. the murder of George Floyd, should, when you think about it, bring us together. It should unite us in our disapproval and disgust of such an ignorant action, an emotion I'm sure we all share in this case. Yet so far, all it has done is divide us from each other even further. Spurred on by a mainstream media that is bordering on sociopathic and by violent anarchist groups like Black Lives Matter and even more so, Antifa.
The Harvard sociologist Ethan Foss has done extensive polling of the black community and found that disconnected black youth, which are black youth who aren't in schools and don't have jobs, the people on the lowest rung of society, something around 30% of them think the system is rigged and 70% don't. So what we're getting is the voices of black people who believe the systemic racism narrative promoted to the most powerful media positions in our country. So we're getting the impression that this is a uniform view, and it's not.
Right. So this is sort of the Jesse Jacksons, Al Sharptons. They get moved up because they're given sort of simple answers.
Right.
So
the anti-fascist movement. Antifa is a group that took the concept of hiding in plain sight way too literal. Because let's be clear about one thing, Antifa are themselves fascist. Merriam-Webster gives this as a definition of fascism: a tendency towards or actual exercise of strong autocratic or dictatorial control. Now that is exactly what they are attempting to do at the moment. In 1919, the Italian word fascista was applied to the black-shirted members of Benito Mussolini's organization, the Fasci di Combattimento, or combat groups, who seized power in Italy in 1922. Fasci or Fasci refers to a group or a small mob. It seems Antifa know their history, right down to the outfits. Before I continue, please express your appreciation or outrage for this video by clicking that like button and sharing it to social media. And by subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. I really appreciate every one of them. Now, turning back to the statues and comparable issues. Sure, some of these statues need to be removed perhaps and moved to museums. And yes, things like blackface might portray bad stereotypes to those who look for them. But only to them, not to our kids or something. Does that mean that all those old Disney cartoons have to go as well? I mean, it just strikes me all as very rigid and childish, but not childish in a good way. Just look at blackface in the Netherlands during our Santa Claus or Sinterklaas celebration on December 5th. Do you think even a single child sees this blackface, or Zwarte Piet, Black Pete as he is called traditionally here, as a black person? I know I didn't, and I know none of my friends did. And I'm sure a little has changed in that respect. Children are innocent in every generation. They just see a bunch of funny dressed up people doing their thing. It is the adults who insist on seeing them as separate races, making them effectively the actual racist. But still, I can understand people's emotions here. So yes, I am in favor of eventually solving these issues and changing them gradually when there is appropriate time to be allotted to such matters. But don't you think there are more important things to put so much of our energy into at this moment in time? Matters that are actually taking lives, starvation, real epidemics, civil wars, to name a couple. We are being led to think that we are not united, while in all actuality we were starting to achieve that unity recently. I'm talking on a spiritual level. It takes time before this expresses itself systemically, physically, of course. But mentally and spiritually we have begun to unite these last months. Now in reaction we are being manipulated to divide again. Humanity is united when in its natural state, but imposed systems like money and the shortage that come along with this make division unavoidable. Racism and anti-racism are both polar opposites of the same thing, a thing that actually divides us no matter what polarity it takes. All these things are triggering us to see others as competition, and how can they not? Every dollar earned has to come out of someone else's pocket after all. Now this might sound like it belongs in my series on the money-free economy, Utopolis 1, but it is a perfect example of the current issues in the US and Europe as well. By dividing people into different groups, we break our natural unity. Money does this by creating differences in wealth between people. But this goes for racism and anti-racism just as much. They are both polarized. It doesn't matter in which direction you are polarized, it still clouds your judgment. Anti-racism still emphasizes difference. All these things should just be forgotten on many levels, except when it comes to heritage, culture, and naturally as tools to communicate. But for those who just crave that discussion, let me stay true to the name of this show. I'm just gonna say it some more and state the following. I'm sure a lot of black people will agree with me on this. I know they do actually, because I often talk about it with people of all races. Line up the most racist people you can find in the West, and I promise you the majority of them will be of black descent. You should hear the stuff that is said about Hispanics, Chinese, and whites too, but I'll give them that one due to history. But how many truly racist whites still exist in the world? I'm not saying they're not there, of course, but they represent a minority. They're extremist.
Sheriff, I'm having a hard time with this. White lives matter, black lives matter, Asian lives matter, Hispanic lives matter, blue lives matter. What is so controversial about saying all lives matter? And what does it say when somebody won't say that?
Sean, it was a pathetic display. It was plantation politics in its finest hour, the continued enslavement of black people emotionally by the Democrat Party with this destructive liberal ideology. And they know it. They're whoring for votes. They know that's what they're doing. The liberal ideology has been very destructive for the black community for the last 50 or 60 years. Poverty is now generational. It's a lifestyle. The unemployment is obscene. They have to send their kids to failing public schools, drug and alcohol addiction, neighborhoods that are crumbling, all under Democrat control. They need to get off their knees and stop this stuff and take a real message to the American people, and especially the black community, that what they have done, they deserve an apology for from the Democrat Party.
Now, remember Minneapolis, the Black Lives Matter movement were chanting pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon. Remember this?
Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon. Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon.
Democrats meeting sucking up to this group.
I don't think they're sucking up to him, but I will say that it's, to me, pandering when you can't say all lives matter. But the reason for it is purely political. There is a real issue of excessive use of police force in the country. Black Lives Matter has come in response to that issue. And so what you get is Democratic politicians.
Sheriff Clark is talking to you.
Well, no, he says no, it isn't. I mean, there's no argument that clearly there's an issue.
There is an argument.
If you have Michael Brown, if you have Eric Garner, if you could go on and on. But I just want to say, you guys have to become more politically sophisticated. The reason that not one Democrat would answer that honestly, I guess you could say Jim
We're not politically sophisticated, Larry Elder.
Because what they're doing is they're playing to that black vote.
I don't know what's happened to you. You wrote a brilliant book several years ago. It was entitled Enough. It was a brilliant book talking about these very same things. I don't know what's happened to you since then. You've gone back over to the other side, maybe out of fear.
I understand why.
So you're far more likely to end up in jail without having a dad than you are because of a white racist cop.
Right. So, but you wouldn't not acknowledge that there are some systemic issues.
Give me an example. Tell me what you think the most systemic racist issue is. What is it?
Well, I would say that because black people in most cases, in many cases, were descendants of slaves, that racism as an institution, that it just, a certain amount of it just exists.
2015? Give me the most blatant racist example you can come up with right now.
I think you could probably find evidence that, in general, cops are more willing to shoot if the perpetrator is black
What's your data
than white.
What's your basis for saying that? Last year...
Well, look, I know a lot of people would say, look what's going on in Chicago.
I know what they would say. I'm talking about what the facts are. 965 people were shot by cops last year and killed. 4% of them were white cops shooting unarmed blacks. In Chicago in 2011, 21 people were shot and killed by cops. In 2015, there were 7. In Chicago, which is a third black, a third white, and a third Hispanic, 70% of the homicides are black on black. About 40 per month, almost 500 per year last year in Chicago, and 75% of them are unsolved. Where's the Black Lives Matter on that? The idea that a racist white cop shooting unarmed black people is a peril to black people is BS. It's complete and total BS. And the reason for these so-called activists saying this is the assumption that racism remains a major problem in America. The media, CNN, especially MSNBC, runs down whenever a black cop shoots somebody, and it's some march on Washington. It's ridiculous. Black people, half the homicides in this country are committed by and against black people. Last year, there were 14,000 homicides. Not talking about suicides, I'm talking about homicides. Half of them were black, 96% of them black on black of that 7,000. Where's the Black Lives Matter people on that?
White people have done a lot of bad things over the years. I'm the last person to deny that. But I'm afraid it pales in comparison to, for instance, the amount of black people in Africa today still enslaving their fellow black men. I say still because back in the slave trade days it was already happening as well. Ever heard of the Moors in Africa? They owned slaves before the West even invented it. White ones too, by the way, or Hispanic. And let us not forget that it was also white people who abolished slavery and who started the emancipation movement. But just as I refuse to take credit for past generations' mistakes, I'm not going to do it for their merits either. It's not important. We are all human beings, and we only have now available to us. So let's take an example from our children and try to forget the whole race difference even exists on an individual level. Race is nothing more than the result of evolution and millions of years of living in roughly the same circumstances, the same environment, which steers your evolution into directions favorable to those circumstances. I think most people have been taught this in high school, but why is it so important to people? Why let the place where your ancestors happened to be born define who you are on such a deep level? Isn't that kind of silly when you think about it? Anti-racism is a burden hidden under the false flag of righteousness and morality, while in reality it only breeds actual nefarious racism. Black Lives Matter states the world thinks that they don't matter. And thoughts create reality, words even more so. I think most people in the world actually agree that all lives matter. So are we going to let a bunch of extremists dictate our worldview and drag us down? No.
We will see to it that you fall, and you fall so hard, you won't know what hit you.
Check your privilege and get back over there.
Yo. Who are you talking to? Huh? You got something to say, little boy? You got something to say, little boy? No, you don't, do you? Why don't you? No, I'll stand wherever I want.
You're bigots. You don't understand
Is that the best you got, darling boy? Is that the best you got, baby boy? Is that the best you got?
That's the New York we love. Is that the best you got? Yes, actually, it is the best they've got. Tear off the masks, turn down the volume, and you see it very clearly. The mob is not fearsome, it's pathetic. These are pampered children play-acting at revolution. They are cowards. That's why they move in packs. They have no skills. All they can do is destroy. The closer you get to them, the clearer all of that is.
They have no clue what they even stand for, these people. Taking down or trying to take down a statue of Abe Lincoln, for example, because it shows him freeing a stereotypical slave. The outrage. but that doesn't even matter. Lincoln's motives in freeing the slaves weren't that pure as most people think anyway. But what should matter is that the statue was paid for by the very slaves he freed, because they were so grateful to him for doing so. You see the madness in this? The people inciting these riots, Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and all the initially peaceful protesters that they managed to drag down with them, they are just rioting for the sake of rioting, destroying for the sake of destruction. They're anarchists, angry pubescent boys and girls who are projecting their self-loathing onto everything around them. Once confronted or asked what they stand for or what their plans are, they fall silent. Or they start blurting out words that even Stalin would frown upon. Take a look.
So fuck Trump, fuck that law, fuck your fucking Independence Day. We need a revolution in order to overthrow this system, bring a whole new communist world into being that can actually ensure the rights of black and brown people. And whether or not you fucking agree, or if you still are caught up in this electoral politics bullshit, even if you are, even your hopes for a more progressive or liberal agenda are not going to happen while the second president of the Confederacy is in the White House. Let's work together to tear that fucking statue down.
Revolution, nothing less.
Where can I reach out to you at?
Yo, so you can catch us at...
And let's talk about this check your privilege white guilt trip bullshit. Political correctness is one of the other great evils of the current time. The PC crowd just has a self-righteousness fetish, in my opinion. They care more about asserting their own superiority above us bigots than about the people they are supposedly standing up for. Did I have a choice in being born white? Did you have a choice in being born the way that you were? No, you didn't, and no one does. So how on earth can one claim that the actions of my quote-unquote ancestors reflect on me in any way? Ancestors. All I have in common with them is race, a small part of my DNA. The concept of white privilege, are we not all using the system those ancestors set up? I think we are. It's not whites only, not for a long time has it been that way. The fact that these groups have the freedom of mind to even ponder the issues that they're pondering is a luxury. They have the system to thank for that. So they are reaping the benefits of those dark days in our past just as much or almost as much as anyone else. Now, as I discussed in episode 34, free will is an illusion. If you haven't seen that one, go see it. It's vital to understand. We are all but the victims of our experiences and the brains we are born with, having little influences on them when viewed from a cause and effect perspective. Experientially, it might appear we have a choice, but we don't if we trace back its cause. We need to use this realization, and not to say, oh, why bother then, but to say, I cannot blame my brother for doing what he did. He's just a victim of circumstance. If we switched places, I would do the same, no exception. Because that is how it is. In reality, racism was and is a dying phenomenon already, long before this crisis ever took hold. Racism cannot exist in a civilization of abundance. It needs inequality. Remember, united we stand, divided we fall. A Dutch comedian, Hans Theeuwen, recently stated very astutely that anti-racism has become a religion, with inherited sins, white guilt, washing your feet, words you cannot say, celebrations you cannot celebrate. Statues are being pulled down, just not by Protestants this time. It's a religion, nothing less. And like much of modern day religion, it is based on dogma. We must open our eyes and not fall for these shenanigans. We should not protest against fake problems presented by corrupt media. What we need to do is unite and form a single fist against all of the old, antiquated systems, which are trying to convince us that we are living in a world which is full of racism, and all of the other things that are manipulating us to hate, cheat, lie, do and fight with each other. Money and lack, which is a lie. Privately owned world banks, which have funded both sides of every fucking war since Napoleon. National borders, for instance, left-wing, right-wing, black, white, red or purple, gay, straight, transgender or whatever. I am actually gay myself, so before anyone starts claiming that I don't know what it's like to be part of a minority, I do. But in no way do I let that define who I am, except when I'm in bed or whatever it's gonna go down, or when I'm deciding who to spend the rest of my life with. But that's where it begins and that's where it ends. All these labels that while of course having a communicative value, have morphed into our identities. And that is where the core of these issues lies. Labels define groups, they're statistical entities, nothing more. Letting labels define individuals and yourself only fosters polarization between you and your fellow human beings. And that is the last thing we need right now. United we stand, divided we fall. United we stand, divided we fall. United we stand, divided we fall. Where we go one, we go all. And so does this episode. Join me again next week for another E for E, Evidence for Extraterrestrials. The week after that will be another P for P, Proof for the Paranormal. Until then, see each other's perspectives, smile to everyone, keep meditating and stay polarized. The light at the end of the tunnel is within sight. Love y'all, do svidania, bye bye.
Wow.
When the forest burns along the road, like God's eyes in my headlights. When the dogs are looking for their bones, and it's raining ice picks on your steel shore.